there's no magic number to how many times you're supposed to have sex every week. Like, it's not once a week. It's not twice a week. It's not 4 times a week. There's just not, like, plain and simple, period. There's not a healthy, normal amount of sex that needs to be had in a relationship in order for a relationship to be healthy. It is so varied, and it is so nuanced, and it is so specific to each individual relationship and each individual person. And I think that is really important to start normalizing, because I know from my life and experience, it was like, if we aren't having sex multiple times a week, then there's something wrong. We have an issue that we need to solve and figure out and talk about. Why aren't we having sex more? Mm-hmm. Like, it wasn't just once a week. It had to be, like, I had a number in my head. It was like 2 to 3 times a week. And ideally it would be like 4 or 5 times a week.
Yeah. I was like basically every day. I thought we had to constantly be having sex or something was wrong. Yes.
Yeah.
So I agree with you on that. That was a hard, and it's like our agreement, right? For a very long time, we met those numbers. And I was like, we are doing it right. Look how in love we are. We don't fight, and we are always having sex. We are the healthiest of healthy couples ever. Right? And then everything kind of started to...
Well, eventually. Because it's just not, it's not realistic. It's not reasonable. It's not... the more I've thought about this, because there was a lot of pushback against this one online where people, because again, it's this idea that there is some magic number, and that if you're not, then there's something wrong. And I mentioned in the reel that you and I have gone months without having sex before. Yeah. And like extended periods of time in our life and in our relationship where we weren't being intimate with each other. And part of the reason why, there's multiple reasons why, because it wasn't just one period of time in our life. It's something that we've kind of gone through where there's been months, there's been weeks. It's when we stopped, it's not even when we stopped. I think that there's so much, and we're not going to unpack all of it during this episode because there's just no way that we would be able to. And it's not even something that we have all the pieces and parts and understanding of, but sex in relationships is something that is so incredibly, like, on the outside, the viewpoint that society places on it, the importance that society places on it, the way that we're brought up and raised about it, the way that, it's so convoluted and I think really, really unhealthy. And what's important is learning how to navigate intimacy within a relationship. And that might look like sex every day. That might look like once a week. That might look like once a month. That might look like we don't have any sex and we're just not physically intimate with each other. And it's all dependent upon... Or
sexually intimate. Physical intimacy and sexual intimacy are...
Correct. Yeah, I meant sexual when I said physical, but you're right. There's sexual, there's physical intimacy, there's intimacy with no physical aspect to it at all, right? Mm-hmm. But when we would go, or when we have in the past gone for weeks and months at a time without it, the reason being is because there were other things going on. And it's not like, sometimes life's crazy and we're busy and hectic and, do you know what I mean? Your priorities are shifting to other things. But for us, it was during times of like immense healing and going through really intense things that required a lot of care and love and understanding and patience from each one of us. And so it was like, that's just not an area that we needed to devote any time to.
Yes.
Because on the opposite end of the spectrum, it was like we both needed space and time to heal the wounds that we were healing and that we were navigating and going through. And that was emotional stuff that we were going through and processing, right? The deep emotional wounds that we were trying to get through. But there's plenty of reasons, right? Obviously, physical issues, injuries, illness, sickness, all these kind of different things that would affect it. And the idea that somehow that's a barometer, to gauge health of a relationship in any way. I think intimacy is important to relationships. And I do think that sex is important, but I don't think it's the most important.
Yeah.
And I don't even think it's like in the top 3 or 4. Like it's one of those things that society will tell you is massively important and gets talked about a lot, and gets judged a lot. And definitely people out there that are going to disagree with this completely. And that's fine, of course.
Yeah.
But I think we need to start normalizing a different conversation around how many times a week is it important to have sex, and more about how many times a week are you connecting with each other emotionally? How many times a week are you holding space for each other? How many times a week are you practicing vulnerability? How much intimacy can you cultivate in your relationship that isn't physical and that isn't sexual? That I think is far more important than, well, we're doing it 3 times a week, so we've got a healthy relationship. No, we don't ever really talk about anything, and, we don't have emotions together, like all of those other kind of things that we've learned over the years are incredibly critical and super important.
And I think too, like, just to give like the other side of the spectrum, if you're trying to build your sexual relationship with your partner, to take the focus off the sex part and actually focus on those things, the emotional, the physical intimacy, that trust, that validating, that feeds that space. So if your goal is like you're wanting more connection there, feeding these other areas, not making it sex, which is so much pressure. Like there's that part, like so many times we just took it off the table. We just took it off the table. It wasn't even something that we were going to worry about, have to feel about, which is scary. And honestly, it's scary to say this, because there's such programming. I feel like, the back of my head is, oh, that's what happens when you get married. That's like what women do, like all of the shame that comes with that. And I'm not feeding your sexual nature. And if I don't do this, then you're going to go find other, there's so many stories that I still have to combat, that I still have to walk myself through and be okay with. Talking about it on the podcast is like scary. When it comes out in the real, it's scary. Like I know it's a good conversation. I know it's healthy. And for us to be able to take the pressure off of that and allow the healing there's so much healing that can happen in that space when you take the pot off the pressure cooker or whatever, you take it off the burner. And that was terrifying for me. My role has been to be a sexual thing, and someone like, wait a minute, like what else am I supposed to do? It was such a scary thing, and I couldn't understand it a lot of times. And then when I got to the space of where I can take it off the table and where I can like say no, when it's okay if I'm not in the mood, it's okay if I'm in the mood and don't do it. It's okay if I just wrap up in something warm. It's okay if I feed that need for comfort and all of these things in so many different ways. There was so much healing that happened, and there's still more healing to be done in that space, because I enjoy intimacy with you. I enjoy every level of intimacy, the emotional, the physical, the sexual. I enjoy our relationship so much, and it feels so good to not feel like if I don't, there's going to be a consequence. And not that you ever made me feel like there was a consequence. It wasn't that. It's the society, like this is going to happen if I don't. You weren't like, if we don't do this, that's a whole other conversation of not healthy. That's not what it was. But for me, the pressure I put on myself and what I thought it meant to be a good partner, to be a healthy partner, to be a loving partner, to be an attentive, like all of that was like, am I keeping you sexually satisfied? And if not, I'm failing across the board. It doesn't matter what else happens. And that's a lot of extreme chaotic pressure that doesn't allow a lot of space for me to even be in my body when we're, and so just like that pause and that times when it is months when we do connect, it's amazing. And when we get back on the, every day, here we go, swinging from the chandeliers, it's really enjoyable because we're there. You know what I mean? It's not just like checking it off the list. Did I rock his world? Okay,
we
I'm
should
a good
totally
wife.
get a sex chandelier, especially mounted,
Right.
just so that we can swing from
Be
it.
like, do you swing from the chandeliers? Absolutely.
We were meant to be.